So let it be written. So let it be done. This is Tabletop Terrors. We're going to talk about travel in RPGs today. And the first thing I'm going to say is you don't have to feel like this has to be a part of your game. I think that, many game masters, you see an epic fantasy movie and a lot of it is travel and sweeping landscapes and all this kind of thing. Lord of the Rings, But I'm giving you permission right now as a game master that you can follow the style of a lot of films and television shows and just have the party arrive. Because look at a bunch of movies. You usually don't see the characters in the car driving unless there's something happening. So my tip is remove travel from your game. Don't even worry about it and just say, okay, you arrive at such and such and such. Now, there are some caveats, and we'll get into that in the deep dive. But overall, I would say as a general rule, you can just cut it unless there's something really important happening. Because like I say, in films, in television shows, it's what we talked about in a recent video, laid out early. The characters should be there. They should be walking up, and that's it. Get to the great part. Or you can even say, I'll even give you permission to do this. All right, so you arrived in the city. It takes you a couple hours to get in, to get acclimated, and you basically make time have already passed. Like, they're in the city. Is there anything anyone would have liked to have done in the last 2 hours? Or, you know what I mean? Where it's like you just go deep in. That's my tip, is cut it unless it's really meaningful. And that has helped me a lot because when I was a game master, I thought, well, you got to travel. And it would get all complex. How do they get there? How many days does it take? Is there a horse, and do they pay someone? And okay, how long would that take then they get there and then it's night. It's like, just go cinematic on it. Describe it. Okay, you arrive at the Shire. That kind of thing. So that's my tip. Cut it unless it's super important.
Yeah, for most travel, I use what Tim describes and what I like to call common sense travel. The idea that the actual characters in the game know when the bus arrives, right? And how much it costs. If that's what your game is about, that's different, but you should assume that, no, well, they're going to walk and they're going to rest when they need to rest. And is food available? Okay, they're going to have some. Basically, like you're saying, Tim, unless it's important, you should cut it. Well, what about when it is important? In my opinion, especially for Dungeons and Dragons, but for most RPGs, they don't have a lot of great systems for, can you make it across the desert without dying, right? Because this is now travel that matters. Well, why is it hard to make it across the desert? Well, it's very hot, or you don't have enough food, or you can't find water. A lot of these things are supported by rules in role-playing games. And basically, if you want to use that type of travel, I don't think that the rules support it very well, and that in most cases, you should come up with a way to make it feel like it feels like in movies, kind of the way Tim's describing. Because if you punish the players for not buying enough water in town when they were going into the desert because they didn't do the math right, that's not fun. But if the players barely make it to their next location with little drops of water, one of those situations they're going to talk about. So if you are going to do travel, make sure to make it a part of the game, whether that's like Tim described, well, maybe people are talking on their way to the place to do the heist. But in some cases, maybe there are actions they need to take. But if you're going to use rations and regular rules of how far they can travel and the players have to figure all this out, make sure that's part of the social contract for your game. But if it isn't, don't be afraid to describe a situation where the players just made it without even playing it out. Because especially in the case of the desert, well, maybe that's the story of the city. This city, people can barely reach it. And most people, right outside the walls, there's littered with bones of the players that almost got there. Well, if you describe to them that they got there with just enough water left, you still evoke that whole tone, and you don't have to make the players live the reality of not having enough water on paper so that they then describe, you know what I mean? You're achieving the same thing, but you're getting there so much faster one way.
Yeah, and I think when it comes to travel, the most important thing is what Tim mentioned, that I'm going to try to elaborate on, is you need to make the scenes worthwhile. Um, I'm not a person who's a big fan of just like random encounters, just like random roll tables when it comes to like travel and stuff like that. I'm just like, all right, you camp. I'm going to roll some dice to see if any monsters find you. Monsters found you. Okay, you fight them and kill them. Okay, you move on. Like, and if that's your thing, like by all means, live it up and do your thing. But for me, it feels a bit tedious sometimes to have to like continually just fight through and like nothing's really happening. You're just kind of doing things because they're there. But what you can do is if you still want to sort of evoke that getting to a place, the journey, because that can be some of the most interesting parts sometimes is, how do you get there, is to look and try to build into whatever encounters you put in this travel scenario into character moments, into story moments that can be elaborated on and carried with the party through the game. So, sort of leaning on something Tim mentioned of like Lord of the Rings. I think they do some of the best travel, in movies because when they stop the montage moments, it's always to bring up something that's going to matter, They're going through the mines of Moria. What scenes do you have? You have the scene where Gimli realizes that everyone that he thought was his family was going to be there, they're all dead. That's a character moment that he realizes something that changes his world. There's making a mistake that's going to cause, all the goblins and trolls to notice them. And there's an encounter. And, there's more to him than people thought. That, the party can work together and they can defeat these monsters and they can escape. And then you see Gandalf fall. So it's like all these things have huge outward ripples through the game. And the more you can find those sorts of moments in your travel, the more that you can make them feel like they're part of the story and not a barrier to the next point in the story, So if you're having them travel and they stumble across a group, maybe that group has a sigil that one of the characters recognizes as the faction they also belong to. It's like, why were they attacking us if we're part of the same group? Or why did they have a letter of the town we're going to that we thought was peaceful and on our side, having a writ hiring them for banditry or for warfare, and you can use these things to sort of plant seeds that will come up later and drive the story forward or bring to light character backgrounds or character connections to NPCs, all these things. The more you can make travel bring up those opportunities and take advantage of them, the more exciting it's going to be. The more people are going to remember it as part of the narrative rather than a detour from the story because, well, we can't just magically teleport there, so we have to have stuff happen. No, make that stuff matter, and it'll feel like part of the game, and still get the travel. And that can be a lot more exciting and inspiring than just, rolling, moving the next day, making some ability checks to see if they're exhausted, see if any, spiders find them on the road or whatever. Yeah, make those things matter to the story.
Yeah, and so how do you handle travel? Put in the comments. Do you like doing hex crawl style where you travel is the point of the game? Do you interject it? Do you figure out the distance and play that, or do you just skip it, or anything in between? And what are your tips for handling it? We'd love to hear that. We are Tabletop Terrors. We are all about fun, creativity, and of course, tabletop games. If you are all about those things too, consider subscribing to the channel. And if you hit the notification bell every Sunday and Thursday when we have a new video, a quick tips and a deep dive, then you will be notified. We always end the video with a Tabtarian toast. So let's do that.
May you mend the first brick.
May you kill the first snake.
May you conquer everything you undertake.
Slancha.
Slancha.
All right, so, I'm planning this campaign. This is like a couple years ago, and I'm like, oh man, it's going to be all about travel and scarcity, and we're going to track it all, and here are the rules and the rest. I used it 0 times because every time I used it, it felt like I took out a chisel and a hammer, and I was like trying to wedge it into the normal flow of the story. And I think that's when I realized, I was like, there's nothing interesting about travel. Name the last time as a person that you were like, oh wow, that was a drive I sure am gonna remember. It doesn't happen. You get to work, you work, and then you drive home. In fact, most of the time we try to drown it out with phone calls and music. So anyway, yeah, I had the realization. Travel's not my favorite part of the game. There's nothing wrong with it though. Do you?